Welcome, everyone. My name is Tiffany Lau. I'm the Executive Director for ULI Hong Kong, and this is the fourth session of our series called Forum for a New Central. I'm delighted to bring to you a great panel of esteemed speakers today that are doing such amazing and important work in our communities, focused on my favorite topic, people. So this session is called The Power of People in Place, and we'll be exploring better ways to look at inclusive development strategies. And, you know, we are all looking towards the future of Hong Kong as we recover and reinvent in 2021. So I don't want to take up too much time in my intro, but I do invite you to join us next month for the next installment on March 4th. And that one will be about shape and form and new ways of creating commercial space in Central and beyond. So without further ado, we're going to start with our speakers. Today we have Chris Law, Sujata Govada, Lisa Gainsley, and Marisa Yu. And we will start with Marisa.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pull up my screen and give me 1 second. Oh, it just says I cannot start. I'll try once more. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So again, yeah, thank you, Tiffany, and ULI and colleagues over there for the opportunity to share on this topic. And just a quick Happy New Year. We haven't seen each other in a very long time. And this topic in particular is very dear to me, with new central power to the people. So today I know I only have 5 to 7 minutes to share on my views on the topic and also some provocations. I'm a big believer in cities as engines of generosity, and more about the need for face-to-face interaction to benefit human capital in the context of a city. And also something quite inspiring that I keep in mind quite a lot in our foundation's work as we build stakeholder engagement is the greatness of a community is mostly accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. And I do think with the work we're doing in the foundation, it's been 7 years of very intense questions of what is Hong Kong, you know, what is our city, what's our history. I'm just putting out this fellow's work recently, who's been looking at the last 30 years of how Hong Kong is featured in video games. And, you know, often when we think of Central, from either the former Legco building or Tycoon or incredible skyscrapers in Central or Landmark or Graham Street Market, there's always this wonderful sense of diversity, and I'm always quite impressed in how this M+ Design Trust Fellows work has been able to chart the history of Hong Kong through over 150 titles, curiously representing all diversities of what Hong Kong is, from Kowloon War City to you know, the kind of nostalgic depictions or cinematic interactions. So what I'd like to put forward is what is the representation, the perception of Hong Kong today, and how do we bring communities together during also such difficult kind of post-COVID times. In our foundation recently, a very quick kind of update is we launched a community resilience program, launched a survey to reach out to reduce social distancing because of the context we face. And the upper left and also right behind me in my studio, we had some young designers that we've been supporting produce prototypes of the future or representing community resilience. So we have a Hong Kong brick on the upper left corner. They were tasked to create something homemade, studio made, to represent something new. And this is a Hong Kong brick reconstituted from items that have been, stores that have been taken down during COVID, and then reconstituting in new materials to produce a new rebuilding of a positive foundation. And I'm cognizant that this topic is, giving power to the people, but it's also opportunity building, and also the generosity of local designers to international designers coming together to raise questions about the future of home, city, and work life. The initiative is ongoing, and it's allowing us to rethink not only just what Central is as a district, but also other districts around the area and the region, even expanding to Greater Bay Area. And for the last, few years in the foundation, we've been quite humbled, but also able, because of, again, the generosity of the community, whether it's from different stakeholders to come together to explore new ideas. And I will just share a very quick case study here on the stakeholder processes coming out of Design Trust Future Studio as a flagship long-term program to stitch together multiple voices and advance that spirit of generosity and shape, the region and the city through these processes. So if the question is, what is play or what is people? Play is a human right. Public spaces, it should be rights of access. How do we rethink our public space in context of our Hong Kong city? And we've been looking at micro parks as a potential for neighborhood revitalization. Of course, producing very provoking exhibitions to get the attention of, government planners, to young designers to have a voice and stake in building the city. And this, as a case study, is quite interesting, very provoking. We created with a team with a mentor, Sam Jacob from London, with designer from Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and cross-disciplinary team, created a Uber delivery concept of future parks delivered to your home, which is something we obviously do not want. But how do we produce real spaces for the community? So at this point in time, it's been since 2018. I know Chris, Sujata, and various panelists on the panel today are quite familiar with this work. We have 4 pilot sites, 2 in Yaojian Wangkoi, 1 in Central Western District, and also 1 in Chuan under process. It's been a long process, very challenging, but a lot of kind of community positive spirit coming through, where members of the Architecture Service Department, Policy Innovation Coordination Office from the government, LCSD, to really talented young designers, curators, advisors come together to really build more playful, practical, but also neighborhood led, district led parks, really for the community's needs. It's been an extraordinary process, and I'd love to share more. It's been a really interesting curatorial way to bring and stitch expertise and question expertise. I mean, I look up to Chris Law a lot, also Sujata's work with us, but this was a really interesting flagship model to stitch mentorship and mentees and designers together from the region to create better public parks for the community. So it takes a lot of energy and stakeholder engagement from legislators, grassroots community, activists, media, fresh graduates, government architects, and policymakers to come together. And this is an example of a positive model. We're still testing it, but it's been really wonderful to engender that sense. And, under construction right now in Chun Wan, we're aiming for Q1 completion for the first park, which is, themed under Plays for the People, a communal living room. We have 1 in Yaojian Wangkoi, which is also site-specific to that particular community need. The 1 in Central, near Central, is Hill Road, looking at Sek Tong Joy area, which is primarily fascinating kind of gentrifying neighborhood, but has a lot of local aspects. And then fast forward, to keep that, energy of community participation, it's taken quite a lot of dialogue, discussion, and stakeholder engagement. And just the last 30 seconds, with the larger projects, the micro parks, we've also been testing other ideas of building micro initiatives for the community to participate as a response to COVID. And so besides creating parks, it's really thinking about the issues we're facing today. So more and more people using food delivery, eating at home. We have mentees who are designing the park, social designers creating their own, bake your own cutlery at home, designers making new sensory toys and educational toys for the community, and technically coming together to really shape and strive for a better city future. So we're having a quick pop-up also in the next few days. Do come visit us at PMQ, another space in Central District. I'll be keen to explore more about these topics of how design-led and also cultural-led reinvigoration, cultural stakeholder management can be better utilized. So thank you.
Thank you. I know you had a lot to pack in there, and there were more topics you wanted to touch upon, but it's great to see the energy and creativity at work in our neighborhoods. So moving on, Sujata, I'd love to hear from you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Tiffany. And it's great to see all the other co-panelists on this session. Again, as Marisa mentioned, I think the topic is very, very close to my heart, power of people and place. And so thanks for inviting me, Tiffany. Next, please, I'm going to just share a little bit about, you all know UDP International is where I've spent more than 26 years of my 35-year career. And then next, but also since 2014, the other area I've spent energies is with the Institute for Sustainable Urbanization, ISU, where we've done a lot of research and local initiatives. And I'll share the local initiative that we worked together on in Central later. But before next, one of the things that I think we're looking at is the happy cities movement. Where cities need to be people need to be happy in the cities that they're living in. And I think that is one thing. And even if you go back to the ancient cities, it was taken for granted right from Greece and before, that public spaces are important for people to come together. And like the Greek agora, and you have Ebenezer Howard looking at how to make the city happy with garden cities and everything. Next. And we have other authors like, the Jane Jacobs, which, we all know the death and life of great American cities is still valid today, even though it was published in the 60s. Then you have Jan Gehl, whom I had the privilege of having him speak at one of the ISU events in Hong Kong in 2017. It was just absolutely wonderful. And then also more recently, Charles Montgomery with his Happy Cities book. And we hope to invite him maybe this year or next to come to Hong Kong. And I met him actually in a Happy Cities event in India. And I think that was one of the events that at the end of the event, I really felt happy. It was a 3-day event, and I'd like to bring this to Hong Kong. And I'll share about the Happy City workshop that we've held. Next. So happiness and well-being, I think rather than focusing just on GDP and the city's economic indicators, I really think we need to look at how people are living in the city and how happy they are. And if you talk to the spiritual gurus, like many in India, they'd say that happiness actually starts with you. And if you are happy internally, then you make people around you happy. And then if the people in the community are happy, then you eventually transform it to the neighborhood, to the city. And but there are some ingredients, and for a city to be happy, like you need to look at the how equitable the city is, whether people are healthy, especially in our COVID times, this becomes very important, but also whether we are really being true to the earth, our planet, whether we are doing the right things in terms of sustainable and smart developments. Next, please. If you look at happiness index, right, we find that like Finland is top of the list, 7.8 out of 8, and Hong Kong is 5.4, so it's ranks at 76, and I think we need to do a lot more to actually bring it up. And Bhutan, I think, is one of the first countries that actually started this whole thing about happiness index earlier on. And you have a US at 6.9. And I think people can also question how these indices are made and what is the validity of these indices. But I think for a city, for the people to be really happy is very important and equitable. The city needs to be equitable, and there needs to be a lot of public spaces for people to actually enjoy, besides the opportunities, employment, education, for recreation, and everything else. Next. The comparison between major world cities, if you look at the livable cities index, Vienna stands first. Strange, like, Hong Kong is actually, even though it's very unaffordable, it starts at 38. And part of the reason for this is really because of the safety and general security in Hong Kong. It's a safer place compared to the some cities in the US and other places. And if you look at the living space index, this is something that Hong Kong really needs to improve, is very, very low. And I think it's not necessary that other places like, say, Toronto need that much space either. So they can learn to become more compact, whereas Hong Kong can actually look for ways to provide more space per person. And if you go to the next slide, the open space as well, or population density, obviously we all know Hong Kong tops the chart. But when you look at open space, it's actually at the bottom. And for an extreme dense city like Hong Kong, you really need a lot more open space. It's not enough just having country parks, but really in urban areas to have uh, uh, public open spaces of good quality is very important. Uh, and so 2.8 is actually very low, and we need to get much higher than that. Next. So if you look at just the economics part of it, Hong Kong has done very, very well for a long time, GDP wise. But then on the other aspects, social aspects, I think Hong Kong has a lot more to do. And we know about all the people living in subdivided flats, the some of the homeless population, the issues, especially in COVID, they actually endure the most. And also from a scientific standpoint, as mentioned by Charles Montgomery in his book, is about the positive response and feeling, and reducing the pollution and traffic congestion, and also the making the city less automobile oriented and more interactive at human scale actually add value to this. I would also add another dimension, the spirituality, connecting, being connected spiritually, and also knowing that we are all connected as human beings, but we are also connected to nature. And that's why we have a responsibility to take care of the planet is very important. And being compassionate about people is key as human beings. Next, please. And so these are some of the things. How do you make our cities more walkable, more bikeable, people friendly, human scale, and a lot of, like, open space and public space that easily to be accessible for people of all sections of society is very important. Next. I know Hong Kong is making improvements, and this is the Happy City workshop we held, which was very interesting with a lot of speakers. And then I think we're going to have one more session this year before hopefully doing the summit later on this year. Next. These one of the initiatives we shared this also, the Smart Cultural Precinct in Central, which is where Taigun, PMQ, and Central Market are. They are actually formed the cultural triangle that was coined back in 2008 when I was working on the adaptive reuse concept of PMQ. And this becomes the core of the Smart Cultural Precinct. Next. I think I should move a little bit quicker. This is the smart and sustainable city framework that we developed that focuses on people, place, and planet, and good planning and smart thinking and good design with technology as an enabler rather than just as a driver that would then say that you can have bad planned cities, but somehow you wire it, it becomes smart. And this is trying to say that really good planning and design is important and key, and with a focus on people, place, and planet. And then you can have all the other aspects of living, governance, mobility, economy, environment, and infrastructure as the areas, but they're embedded on the basic foundation of spirituality and consciousness. Next. And I'm just briefly run through the cultural precinct where we were asked to see how this can be realized. And I think the phase one could easily start with Taigun and PMQ because they are already there, operational, and phase two leading towards phase three in central market. And by the way, the URA is quite actually keen on this and to realize the cultural precinct. Next. These are some of the events and activities we have held in 2019 before COVID, where we could meet in person. And the elderly, this was done in partnership with YWCA and funded by the District Council, Central and Western. And what we found with this experience was that you're really meeting grassroots people in the community, a lot of elderly and the youngsters. And we had the backing of the District Council, Stephen Chan, but also other key members of the Hong Kong, Bernard Chan from the Executive Council as well. And you can see Maggie and others in the walks as well as the workshops. Next. We had like several other workshops and events. This is actually also a workshop where the elderly are sharing their experiences in Central. And this is after doing a walk between the three main buildings, but also the area and sharing some of the issues of lack of pedestrian safety and difficulty to walk through these areas. Next, please. So we had the tours of individual buildings, the Taigun PMQ, as well as the central market, the lower area, the 86 Connect, and through the mid-levels escalator. Next. These were the placemaking event that we did in one of the sit-out areas near central Taigun. And we were asked, can we hold this every weekend? And so there's appetite for this kind of stuff in Hong Kong. Like, Chinese you also does this. They call it the magic carpet. Very, very popular among the people. And you have participants actually locating and finding in the map the different areas within the city. Next, within Central, actually. And we also had, calligraphy and artwork done by instructors, and people participated in sketching exercises as well, where they were quite interested in this whole exercise. Even the elderly participated. Next. And we had a closing event on walkable cities, and this happened during the protests. We ended the event at about 12:30, and then the MTR closed at 1 o'clock that day. This was in Taigun, and the elderly, you can see some of them actually, they performed at this event, sang, danced, and everything, and they were so happy We even, next, please. So they're very much for it. We even shared a map that we've created for the area and highlighting some of the key buildings and some of these different things you could do. Next. And also the link to Harbourfront. And we also did a master plan where we can show some of the streets like Elgin and Staunton could be pedestrianized. And then Hollywood Road more as a shared road, maybe Queens Road doesn't need to be this just a traffic congested street, but could become more like a boulevard. Next. And we find that even some of the photo montages showing the existing and the what could be in the area near Tygoon. Next. This is the next one showing Staunton Street, where it could become much better than all the cars, especially when the elderly were walking on this street. They couldn't use the street properly because it had so many cars at that time. Next. The government is also working on this area as a pilot scheme, and it's good to see that they've identified Hollywood Road as well as Taunton and Elgin, as well to have some kind of more pedestrian-friendly streets. Next. They also look at the larger picture with tying into Central and look at this area as the cultural area. Next. We've also had the benefit of presenting this at the Biennale, where the TI students helped build the model for us. Next. And our next thing is to come up with maybe using the business improvement district concept and actually come up with creating a community benefit zone, talking to all the stakeholders and people within this area, the shop owners and everybody, and also creating not only a walkable cultural precinct, but also a community benefit zone, and also creating an app that can link PMQ, Tygoon, Central Market, but all the areas in between. Next. I think this is the last slide. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. And we are glad that we could participate in this and hope to realize this in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujata. It'd be really wonderful if this is the year when all of your work kind of comes to fruition. Really interesting to see the data behind this notion of how happy we are in a city. Perhaps ULI should commission a report on the happiness of Hong Kong. Moving on to Lisa, switching gears a little bit. Lisa, if you could tell us about what you're up to out east in Quarry Bay in Taiku.
Yeah. So firstly, thank you, Tiffany and ULI, for the opportunity to share. Completely agree with Sujata and Marisa that whether it's district-led parks for the community or livable cities, ideally we should be aiming to leverage the uniqueness of a local precinct and its people's well-being to develop in a sustainable way. I think that's why some of our proudest achievements are a result of engaging with the local community, embracing the local heritage, or participating in PPPs. A few examples include the Old Wan Chai Revitalization Initiative, which people refer to today as the Star Street Precinct, and also some of our endeavors in, with our Sino-Ocean Taikoo-Li Chengdu development, where we strove to preserve some 500-year-old traditional courtyards. These are rare opportunities to collaborate with a wide breadth of different stakeholders in the community. So I think for today, taking into consideration the session's title, exploring better ways to ensure inclusive development strategies, what I'd like to focus on is what are the impacts of these inclusive development strategies or structures? How do we measure their success, especially in an effort to encourage future initiatives? And how do we ensure continuity of the original strategy or the original intent of the development strategy to ensure that the community continues to develop and transform and thrive over the years? So these are really tough questions to answer, and there doesn't seem to be too many industry gold standards to go by. But if we're able to answer some of these questions, in a way, it would almost help you work backwards into either the structure or the partners that you would need to achieve your development goals. So next slide, please. So at Swire Properties, we are trying to answer some of these questions. In 2016, we launched our Sustainable 2030 Development Strategy, where we hope to identify and manage the full spectrum of environmental, social, and economic impacts, and to integrate sustainable development into every facet of our business. We've organized it by 5 strategic pillars: partners, people, economic performance, environmental performance, and the most relevant pillar for today, places. So places really sits at the heart of our SD 2030 strategy. It's our efforts to create and nurture high quality spaces that will translate to vibrant and sustainable communities in the long term. Next slide, please. So just in March of last year, we issued our first Places Impact Report. So we took into account leading research and international best practices to develop a Places Impact Framework. Now, this framework and the report aim to provide evidence and analysis to understand how a place impacts the people who visit it, who use it, and the city that it's a part of. So there's 3 levels to the framework that sort of expand as you go out. The first level is the investment level. So this looks at things like hardware, which are buildings, infrastructure, public spaces. Within this, we also have software, which encapsulates engagement with the community through events and social initiatives. Then you go a step further to the place level. And this looks to capture the economic, social, and environmental characteristics and impacts of the area. And then lastly, we take a broader view to look at the city level. So how do we align with and contribute to citywide objectives? Next slide, please. So we've initially applied this Places Impact Framework to our Island East development as an inaugural case study, but we do aim to apply this framework across our global developments, current and future, and we'll continue to benchmark our progress within this framework as our developments transform and evolve. So in this slide, you can see we've been transforming Island East District for the past 135 years. So this time frame is a recent snippet, but it starts to show you a picture of the hardware and software investments that we've made. Hardware is obviously the buildings development. On the software side includes things like artistry, our Tong Chong Street Market, the Loop, all of these initiatives which we've partnered with local and international NGOs to help further engage the community. Next slide, please. So then looking more broadly at the framework, we move on to place. And so this is broken down by vibrancy, livelihood, well-being, and resilience. So with vibrancy, we're really trying to understand, okay, why do some places thrive with energy while others stagnate? So we consider factors such as population density, diversity, and amenities that promote interactive behavior, movement of people, and accessibility. For livelihood, we look at the role and function of place. So who's there on a daily basis, what activities occur, and what value is generated. With well-being, we're hoping to understand, okay, how does a place and placemaking create quality spaces that contribute directly to people's health, well-being, and happiness, a bit like Sujata touched on. And then lastly, with resiliency, this is looking to consider the ability of a place to prepare, plan for, and recover and adapt to adverse events, whether it's in the physical space, the social space, or economic spheres. So resiliency is quite broad in the sense that it extends beyond the physical assets and looks to include community and economic considerations in the framework. Next slide, please. So in the last level of the framework, we take into account the most macro view, which is what does this mean for Hong Kong specifically and its citizens? So to answer this question, we've looked at the city's plan, Hong Kong 2030 plus, and the government's vision for Hong Kong to continue to be recognized as Asia's world city, a place that's livable, competitive, and sustainable. We've also tried to look further afield to such institutions as the UN and their sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. So that covers the basis of the framework. And to just wrap it back up, We really believe our places impact framework will help to ensure that development activity is inclusive, sustainable, and successful for all stakeholders involved. So I didn't speak specifically to the specific modes of public engagement, but collaboration is inherent and absolutely essential to achieving success within this framework. So many factors of the framework are impossible to achieve without community and stakeholder involvement. This framework was developed specifically to move away from the commercial lens of success, which has traditionally been, solely focused on the bottom line, and instead to consider success through the lens of the wider community. To address some of the questions that were originally proposed in this forum, I do believe that if there is evidence and analysis to understand how a place impacts its people, that this will then drive the type of stakeholder engagement and structure required to keep a place vibrant. So it's back to that idea of, if you know what you're aiming for and you know what that looks like, you can sort of work back into the structure you need to get there. And then lastly, our hope at Swire is that this framework will serve as a benchmark for our industry to build on. And this is not just, developers within the commercial real estate space, but for all of those involved in creating better quality spaces and improving the lives of the local community. So that's my bit for today on the topic. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, especially on that last point. I think, Swire is really showing leadership, and yeah, for sure that should inspire the rest of the development community to also prioritize this kind of inclusive strategy towards development. So last, we want to go to Chris Law. Chris, if you can run us through your presentation, and then we'll have a good group discussion after.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for having us. Power of people and places. Well, really, the first question is why? Why? I mean, getting people involved is lengthy, troublesome, even chaotic. Now, Maggie Brook and I have been working on this issue for the last 15 years. And I think there are two reasons why people are essential in the whole development process. The first one is about the knowledge gap. As professional, as businessmen, no matter how much survey statistics we pour over, there is always a knowledge gap, especially in coming up with what solution do we have to make the city better. So having people involved is essential to fill that gap, that ever-changing gap of knowledge. And secondly, getting people involved is not just about filling the knowledge gap. It's actually also about getting people to work together to solve problems themselves. So in another word, it's about building social capital. So building of social capital very often is even more significant than the size of the construction project. Next slide, please. I would go through three tried and tested strategies that Maggie and I worked on in Hong Kong, how to engage people, how to get people into the formula in Hong Kong. The first one is really about consultation, engagement, and workshop. It's really about getting people together so that we could have the first-hand understanding of what are the issues, what are the problems, and how to find solution. Next slides. An example is the public-private partnership program to improve the public spaces in the Star Street area of Wan Chai. Next slide. Yes, this one's really started with a pop-up shop with the models and the design to ask people who live in the area, who work in the area, what do you want the future of the Star Street to be? And then we actually got a lot of unexpected answer. For example, they don't want anything glossy. They don't want anything that are kind of trendier or kind of nicer. Really, they want to conserve the character of the place. And the most important thing is really about how to get the elderly people to be able to walk up to the Wan Chai, the Star Street area. Next. Yeah, so improving the staircases and the railing on the staircases are actually the most important thing. Next. And these public spaces, once completed, was used as venue for a lot of community activities. Next slides. The second strategy is, okay, one level up, apart from finding out consultation, apart from engagement, can we actually ask the community to do their own thing, to co-create activities so that everything is bottom up rather than top down. The Very Hong Kong programs that we started in 2013 is that kind of program. We just put a notice up on the Facebook and say that we've got a pier, for example. Then suddenly you have thousands of people turning up, organizing their own activities, performances, workshops, and so on. Next slide. And you can do that on the waterfront in Aberdeen. The storytelling, filmmakers suddenly want to show their film. So it's really about people co-creating something that everyone can enjoy. Next slide. This is taking over the Vaux Road for one Sunday afternoon and have something like 100 different community group making use of the road as football or games, or workshops, and so on. Next slide. Now, the third level is really about giving the land resources back to the community so that they could control it, they could do their own thing. And I think that is really the most important level of all three. Eventually, the community should take over community land. This is the Collaborate Hong Kong program that Very Hong Kong has been running in the last 2 to 3 years. Next slide. In the last couple of years, we have been working with 80 NGOs in Hong Kong in 16 different districts. And these NGOs want to take over community land for, let's say, kind of 7 years from the government. And then they want to run it, they want to do their own thing. Now, this is actually when you really know what the community want to do, how do they want to create benefit for society. Next slide. A whole variety, diversity of stuff. Like in Central, Shing Wan Street, where the Ghost Festival Association is, they want to do a community living room. Next. Further on in Central, on the Western District, a group want to do community entertainment space, but mainly focus on recycling. They've been running recycling initiative in the district for many years now, but they could do with taking over an government market, open air market. Next. Next slide. Yeah. This is now starting the 200,000 square feet of farmland has now been taken over by a bunch of housewives, but they were all ex-farmers. They took over 200,000 square feet of farmland and fish pond to run community farm, organic farm in Tin Shui Wai, so that local people can afford organic food. they do the farming themselves, and then they could have the fruit of the labor. Next. This is the YWCA taking over under the flyover, turn that into a space for community arts. And then they will be building a new community arts center under the flyover. This is YWCA in Tin Shui Wai. Next. This is taking over a village school in Tai Mo San. It's a group of really good photographers in Hong Kong. They have taken over this community, village school, and turned that into a center of photographic. You can learn how to do photography, you can do exhibition, you can have conferences, you can have international festival in there. Next. This is a school of everyday life. It's about sustainable education, or education of sustainable living. Hopefully, they will take over another village school in Yuen Long. They hold all kinds of capacity building program to teach both adult and school children how to live in a sustainable way. Next. This is a group of grassroots community wanting to take over a pedestrian walkway plus the 2 pieces of land in Sam Shui Po, so that the grassroots in the district can have places for markets, workshops, and all kinds of learning activities in there. Next. This is a group of animal lovers wanting to take over another school in Lama Island to do animal adoption and education center. Next slide. So, yes, going back to why places. Now, we all want to do placemaking. As an architect, we love design. Design is very important for placemaking, but that's only half of it. The other half of placemaking is really about getting people to feel that they own the place, or getting people to feel that they belong to the place. Now, so placemaking is simply impossible unless you involve people, and unless that placemaking process is bottom up. Placemaking cannot be done by decree, and it cannot be done by design only. The placemaking process is a process that really get people to work together, to feel that this place belongs to them and they belong to this place. A sense of place is very much about feeling that, at least with some people, there are a sense of belonging. And going back to Central, if we think about Central, one of the great strengths of Central in the last 150 years, since 1842, is that community group has always been major landholder and landowner and operator in Central. Just a very, very quick list: Caritas, the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Union Church, St. Joseph, the Cricket Club, the Hong Kong Club, the LRC. Now there's slightly more establishment, but then diversity. The Lusitano, the Helena May, the French Mission, even the Masons, and the Ghost Festival Society, Shing Wong Temple, the Mammoth Temple, the YMCA, the Finch Club, and to today, the PMQ and Tycoon. Community group has always been the major landowner, stakeholder in Central. And I think apart from the more established community group, there are hundreds of new community groups coming up. And I think the future of Central should really make sure that the community is completely involved in inventing the future of Central, not just being consulted, not just being engaged, but actually as the key driver in inventing the future of Central together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's so exciting to see that level of engagement and truly the sort of pride of place that you can see in our neighborhoods. It's really critical to empower the people, as you said. I do want to have some time for discussion. We only have a few minutes, but maybe staying with you, Chris, and then going on to the other speakers. What's been the biggest challenge facing the work that you continue to do? In all of your kind of activation work and this idea of really trying to collaborate and co-create. What is the biggest challenge and what and why?
Yeah, I think there are probably three areas. The first one is capacity building. I think there is still the need for capacity building, the lack of know-how in the community to take things into their own hand and then do things. That really required quite a lot of capacity building work and empowerment work. But then the second one is really the transparency of information. Right now, if you want to take over a piece of land, you don't even know where those resources are. There is actually a lack of transparency in land and resource information in Hong Kong. And that degree of transparency is absolutely essential. And the third one is the whole technical approval process when you want to do things. Right now, our approval process are all in the 20th century, when today we're in the 21st century. The whole approval process for signing leases with the government, getting planning permission, getting all of these are paper-based, and they're all still based on 20th century technology. What we really need is actually a data-driven process so that the community can understand where the pieces of land or buildings, where the vacant buildings are. And then when they get approval from the 16 different government departments, and when they want to do stakeholders engagement with the rest, the whole process need to be data-driven rather than paper and procedural-driven as it is now.
Yeah, you touched upon data and how important the role of data is in all of this. The same question, but to Sujata, I saw a lot of data in your presentation. Why hasn't the cultural kind of precinct happened already? And, how do we use that data from your happiness index work and put it into practice and change policy even? Or is that a challenge for you? Sujata?
Okay, sorry. Thanks for that question. Because I started this journey in 2008. And when I mentioned the cultural triangle at that time, I'll tell you one interesting thing is when we did the adaptive reuse for PMQ, there was a press release. South China Morning Post just did the actual rendering of the PMQ adaptive reuse, which had the atrium, everything else. But the China papers, the Chinese press focused only on the cultural triangle. So what they took away from it was the importance of the cultural triangle rather than just the building adaptive reuse. So that told me something, and I kept at it from then. And at the time, people like, even in, central police station at that time, everybody thought, what am I talking about? Because this was like long time ago. And then later, now, like say in 2018, everybody is now actually on board. So I think maybe either I'm ahead 10 years or other people are behind 10 years. I don't know, but it takes a while for people to realize the value of something like this, because there's no reason why we should have these place in Central with all these adaptive reuse, which, we used to demolish buildings left and right before. Thank God in Hong Kong, at least we are conserving some of these things. Next stage is to get to how do you create conservation and renewal on an area based rather than just a building based. And I think the idea here is to connect all these areas. And it's good to know That district council has actually funded the recent, which was very little, but at least they've acknowledged it. URA is on board. Taigun is on board. PMQ also values the importance of this. AIA Hong Kong, a lot of other people. So they are coming together now. I think the biggest challenge now is to actually do the groundwork and show government, like we did for the harborfront connectivity study, showing that connecting the harborfront is important. And then therefore you see all these initiatives happening, and then take it forward to making it happen. But I think it needs to happen from the ground up. That's why even central and western central and western, what is the KT law represents, that is they concerned group, they are also backing this. So it's like we need to do a lot of hard work. And I think really when I feel Hong Kong has changed is when government actually realizes and they are proactively doing this rather than the other way around. Only the other way around. Like Chris, you put in a lot of effort in all your work, right? And with Maggie, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing it, but there should be enough input from government that they realize proactively that it's important. I think Hong Kong needs more time for that.
Yeah, leadership is definitely a key here at every level, but especially at the government level. Marisa, I wanted to touch on something you talked about, which I just love, this idea that the city can be an engine of generosity. But, is a challenge for you potentially that, in this age of protests and pandemic, are we starting to protect ourselves more? Are we becoming more insular? Do you see the development community actually, resonating with that idea of being more generous now? I mean, I know for sure, not all players are like Lisa and Swire. So, what are the challenges facing your work?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a perpetual optimist. I always tend to see the goodness in everyone or every structure, and of course, critical of limitations. But yeah, this notion of generosity is fascinating. I mean, the micro initiative or micro parks, it's really about that process and investing in the invisible, right? So oftentimes you don't actually see that process. So we've been quite obsessive about documenting every paper, every archive, every workshop, every discussion, time-lapsing the park's construction in a way to hopefully make change. So one thing we're quite excited about is, I know the parks are still underway, but they are now embedded in policy 2019 address, where 170 play spaces in the next 5 years will be revitalized through the lens of the government. So, it does take a collective effort and collective kind of resource mapping. But I do get a sense that, there are so many new technologies and new ways of performing that we've never actually explored before, online virtual communities, new ways of delivering sustainably. And I think there's a lot of things we also now have to think about. If the home and workspace is the new normal, and office spaces like in Central, are they new event spaces, or are they new wellness economy areas? And I think that has to be planned out. And there are many new types of opportunities where we can be much more efficient with resource management. So just say if a developer does put X percentage towards arts and culture, what's the X percentage towards community engagement and involving the community in building? So I don't know. I mean, there's many exciting potentials, but one thing I think we all share the same values. That's why we care a lot about Hong Kong and the community, but it's also now the larger picture of the nature of, how we're going to connect again. And this is one of the most important initiatives we're doing is how do you build community resilience through such social distancing times? What are the new ways of working to living and public space or maintaining our countryside? And that goes to quality, right? So if we give too much power for participation, then where's design excellence, right? Where's expertise? Why did I study architecture for so long? So I think it still needs to have that precision of leadership where they can make decisions about the quality of the materials or the quality of the mass transit system or recycling infrastructures. There still has to be like a collective effort beyond how to curate the right conversation and then have that trickle down, up and down, like upstream and downstream. I think that's really important. I hope that sort of answers part of the question.
Yeah,
But,
thanks, Marisa. Yeah, that's great. I don't want to forget about Lisa and same question. What is the biggest challenge facing your work? And then I want to wrap with actually a quick challenge again, but from each of you to the audience about what should we be doing to actually affect this change ourselves. So Lisa, challenge facing your work, and then also pose a challenge to the audience about how they can play a part in this topic, which is about ourselves and us as participants in making a better Hong Kong, a better built environment, a more resilient future for ourselves. Lisa.
I would say with regards to our work and our efforts, I think sometimes it's the perception of developers in the private space, and this just isn't limited to Swire. I think sometimes there's a perception that some of the placemaking efforts of developers are done for self-fulfillment, for bottom line purposes. So kind of the challenge of how do you overcome that perception. I would say, the scale of investment that is involved to undertake such comprehensive placemaking strategy does take a long time horizon to pay off. And even then, it's very difficult to sort of measure the true economic impact of the bottom line. And I think this is really exemplified by the fact that you don't see a huge number of players when you look globally taking on such placemaking efforts. That being said, it doesn't mean that it doesn't pay off in the long run. It's just you can't lead with the economics being the driving factor behind your decision towards sustainable development and placemaking. Otherwise, you're unlikely to get the investment off the ground. And I think that's a perception that a lot of people in the community don't necessarily truly understand, but much rather think that the developers are working in their best interest. I would say that the challenge back to the community and the listeners are, thinking about the framework that we proposed and, other industry standards have been proposed, is how do we really start to take that more seriously and really layer that over our efforts so that we know we're going in the right direction, so that we begin to have a framework by which sustainable development can be achieved. It's very complicated. It's certainly a work in progress for us with our reports as we go over time. But, we want to make sure that all the efforts and endeavors that we're putting into these engagements are going in the right direction and are truly successful for all the stakeholders involved. And I think having a framework to sort of guide that is really important. As and I guess that would be the challenge that I would put back out to the audience.
Thanks, Lisa. Sujata, what's your quick challenge to the audience?
I think for everything you do, please keep in mind people, place, and planet. it's important to think of these three. Don't forget the planet, because otherwise we can do a lot on people, place, and then forget the planet and destroy the planet. So we really need to put all these three together, and then come join me in the effort to realize this vision of creating a walkable, smart cultural precinct in Central. It's for the good of Hong Kong and for everybody. Thank you. And we can do this as a model in other places in Hong Kong as well later. Thank you.
Thanks, Sujata. Chris, what's your challenge to the audience?
Well, walk around your district, the district that you love. Walk around your district, discover community land. They could be in the backyard, they could be a piece of vacant land, they could be a piece of land that is underused. That could be for community use as community land, and adopt a piece of land in your favorite district and see whether you can make it better and provide benefit for everyone in the city.
I love that idea. Adopting a place in your city.
Yes.
And
yes.
finally, Marisa, what's your challenge?
I'm always about challenges, but since my whole recent obsession is this critically homemade concept, so please look at our foundation's work on Design Trust Critically Homemade. There's so many young designers to architects or developers even participating and creating these prototypes of the future, and it's really inspiring. So I'm a very optimistic person, but you know, from antibacterial door handles made by designers to homemade baked cookies to you know, all the innovation coming out. I'm hopeful, and I think it's a really nice way now. I agree with Chris, Sujata, and Lisa, reassessing our values. And, you know, we have family and elderly to take care of, our city and health. A lot of mental health issues are rising up, social inequity. And, you know, how do we engender still, you know, a kind of positive participation of all sorts of communities? I think that's something we should be really open-minded about, and that's the survival of Hong Kong. I do think we need to really look at Central and beyond, and you know, we're doing some work now into Island. This festival unfortunately is not moving on due to COVID, but once that's on board, it's breathtaking to see how much inspiration is coming out from our amazing city and also countryside and island culture.
Thanks. I mean, I can speak for myself in that this panel really made me feel good about the future of Hong Kong, and I'm sufficiently inspired by all the great work that each of you are doing. You know, we're over time, but I wanted to thank our audience who finally were able to join us after some, I'm sure, nervous first minutes trying to dial in. But again, we're going to wrap this fourth session of Forum for a New Central. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you to all of the panelists. And that's it for today. So we'll see you again for our next installment on March 4th.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy
I
New
know.
Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Stay healthy.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Tiffany.